One of my favourite video game experiences that I can remember is playing The Witness on PS4. The Witness is essentially a 2D puzzle game set within a 3D free-roaming game. The player is tasked with solving line-drawing puzzles of increasing difficulty as the game progresses and the world opens up to them. The game opens in some sort of bunker corridor with only one way to go, towards a door with a box on it. Upon closer inspection, the line has a circle on one side, sort of like a thermometer. Since there's only one way out of this, the player will eventually end up pressing X, which brings up a sort of interface denoted by a white border around the screen and a dot cursor movable with the left stick. The player will then realise that if they press X with the cursor over the circle on the box, then they have the ability to draw the line from the circle along the path laid out to the end. It's very simple and almost anyone will be able to work out how to open the door, but this is in fact the first instance of the game teaching rules to the player. From this point forwards, the game becomes more and more complex. The starting area uses maze-like puzzles, at which point the player would usually be wondering if this is just going to be it for another 500 or so puzzles. After leaving this area, a perceptive player will usually encounter a doorway on their path blocked by a complex puzzle. It contains symbols that the player at this point would not understand, as well as multiple start and end points. They can try to complete it but will almost always fail. They have not yet learned the language of the game. Upon failing, the player will eventually have to simply give up and move on, at which point they'll usually encounter two small areas. One features black and white square puzzles in which the player has to separate the two colours with the line, and the other features hexagon dots which require the player to cover all the dots with their line before reaching the end. Both of these begin in their simplest possible form and end on a puzzle that can be somewhat challenging to new players. In game theory, conveyance refers to the teaching of ideas, concepts and mechanics to players through subtle means in game design. A sort of video game version of the show don't tell rule, commonly cited in film. In this instance, the player learns the rules of the puzzles from a limited range of possible outcomes for the puzzle, and understanding these rules becomes pivotal to completing later puzzles. Unlike many areas in the game, finishing the puzzles here doesn't result in any direct progression. No additional areas unlocked, and unlike large areas the player later encounters, there's no laser to signify the completion of a section. However, upon seeing no clear course of progression, the player might then find themselves remembering the puzzle from earlier. If they return to the puzzle door, then there's a good chance they'll be able to solve it after a short while, provided they've grasped the concepts from earlier puzzles. This is excellent game design for a number of reasons. Not only has the exercise taught the player how to solve more complex puzzles with some basic rules, but it's also taught the player that sometimes quitting a puzzle and returning at a later stage is not only acceptable, but advantageous. This is the core idea behind Harry Brewis' concept of play conditioning and its role in video games. Similar to conveyance, play conditioning is the idea that video games teach the player how to play the game. However, while conveyance refers to rules and key concepts within the game, play conditioning is concerned with the habits of players and states that habits are dictated by experiences within the game. In this case, the fact that the player can return to this puzzle and complete it with far more ease conditions the player to play in this way, to jump between puzzles and go somewhere else if they're stuck for too long. This makes the game more enjoyable since the players aren't stuck in the mindset of completionism and therefore won't sit for an hour trying to solve a puzzle when they could be having more fun in a different area. The game's goal is to activate lasers around the island to open a door at the top of a mountain. While there are 11 lasers, only 8 are required to open the door and complete the game. This reinforces the earlier philosophy that sometimes it's okay to give up. There are about 500 puzzles, all with different variables and conditions for completion, and the player can't reasonably be expected to finish them all. Of course, it can still be done and the player will be rewarded with a final challenge, but it's by no means necessary. This play conditioning is clear evidence that games can teach players habits and lessons, so it seems obvious to me that games have the potential to make their players smarter. I believe that The Witness is the perfect example of a game that makes its players smarter. Its silent setting and implicit game design utilizes conveyance to encourage inference and deduction from the puzzles involved. It guides the player through challenges by teaching them to utilize mechanics learned from prior puzzles, all while maintaining a good balance between being too easy or hard. While these puzzles don't translate into real-life challenges, the game teaches players to retain knowledge from previous puzzles and to utilize it in the correct way, and often in ways that seem to challenge the initial preconception of the game's rules. Even outside of what one might call traditional learning, The Witness excels at invoking outside-the-box thinking. For example, in one area the player encounters a puzzle with multiple branching paths that will fail the player if they attempt to draw any random line. However, attentive players will notice a bird chirping, which stands out due to the lack of organic life on the island. If the player corresponds the bird's pitch as one chirp for each section of the puzzle, then it can be completed. Another example of the game encouraging lateral thinking is the symmetry puzzle section, in which players must align the puzzle with the environment and trace its outline to solve the puzzle. The game is full of these moments that make the player feel smart for working out the solution, and yet the solutions never feel cheap or unearned. I believe that this game demonstrates how games can enrich the player's mind and boost creativity and problem-solving skills through careful game design, and ultimately answers the question of whether games make us smarter with a resounding yes.